Welcome everybody. We are so happy that even after the fiesta yesterday, there is still so much audience here. So I will just make a very, very brief introduction to our session. So it's about reconciling rural development and biodiversity conservation in Mexico and in Latin America. I mean, most of our presentations are from Mexico. They are around the Sembrando Vida, the Sowing Life program. But we also have a very nice presentation from Bolivia and another presentation which is also on forestry forest restoration in Mexico. So yes, and I'm also very happy that it's mostly young, promising scholars. Some of them, they just finished their PhD and now are in a job. Some are kind of on the last step in their PhD. So yes, let me start. So I'm also going to talk about the Sembrando Vida program, but not so much on measuring its outcomes in the field, but what we've been doing is more like an analysis of how these program contributes to the Sustainable Development Goals. So this was done by, as you see, a lot of people, and really the main author is Sofia Mardero, but she can't make it. She's in the United Kingdom, and there wasn't enough money for her to come. So now I guess I have to deal with all the technology. Yeah, I mean, this is just a reminder of all the interconnected global changes we have to face now. I mean, I won't go into details. We know this, the biodiversity crisis, climate change in all its manifestation, and also the very unequal distribution of wealth in the world. And this is all this interconnectedness is one of the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, they are trying to deal with all this together. And in this paper, we also focus on policy coherence, which is really very, very important in the case of the Sustainable Development Goals. I mean, you just can't put them apart and address one and leave the other, or do it at one scale and then miss the other scale, because like this wouldn't work. So it's really the challenges of the indivisibility and interconnectedness of the SDGs in its implementation. And also this means that if it's really policy coherent, it aims to maximize the synergies between all these different goals, you know. But this would be really ideal, but often it's not only determined by the development goals, but it's also determined by some political intentions. You know, there is an agenda behind and not neutral factors. And therefore, there is a further need to understand the factors influencing initial intentions for policy coherence and how this may be influenced by context over time. I mean, it might have started at some point with all this coherence, but then at some point there might be a departure of it. So, and policy coherence is rarely studied at the program level, like Sembrando Vida, but it's more in a very global context. So we are trying to address this in our talk. Yeah, I mean, we heard a lot about the Sembrando Vida program, and we will hear more about the Sembrando Vida program. This was kind of a reaction to all the structural barriers to rural development. We know we have a high rate of poverty in Mexico. Very, very poor people, especially farmers, are very vulnerable to climate change. Most of the agriculture in Mexico is rain-fed, so if the rains don't fall when they are supposed to fall, it's really very, very bad for the farmers. And it's also true there have been a lot of limitations of past programs in Mexico. I mean, Most of you have heard about the Campo and other programs. So, and therefore the Mexican government launched Sembrando Vida in 2019 for against poverty, reforestation, and biodiversity conservation. So you see from the beginning, it tried to cover a lot of ground, a lot of problems facing in the countryside. So what are the aims and the research questions of our presentation? To explore intentions and contributions over time of the rural development program Sembrando Vida. I'm not really sure if we got all the intentions, because I already told you there are so many intentions which are not written somewhere, but they are in the heads of some people. And to address the policy coherence for sustainable development of Sembrando Vida. So how does it align with the sustainable development goals? And our questions have been, how and why did the government initiate the Sembrando Vida program? And did its goals change over time? Oh my God. Does the Sembrando Vida stated intentions and implementations demonstrate effective climate change and environmental policy? And does Sembrando Vida contribute to the SDGs? Okay, the method was what we did. We went through all the official government websites. We talked to a few key informants, but I have to admit, these were only very few. I mean, people weren't really very keen on talking to us about the Sembrando Vida policy implementation. I mean, it's very easy to talk to the farmers, but then it wasn't that easy to talk to the people really implementing Sembrando Vidas. And then we did an analysis of the mañaneras to understand the official intentions behind the program. And a big part of our work was to go through all the stuff published in the media, on newspapers. And at the end, we could use 70 articles from both Mexican and international newspapers. So one of our results was this timeline. I think I can't go over all of it, but maybe the most important thing. I mean, it was even an idea of implementing agroforestry before AMLO even got president, you know. I mean, even when he was trying for the first time. And then it was really in 2019 that it officially started. It really had a big budget, and it was also proposed to the government of Donald Trump to curb migration. So you see there is another element in Sembrando Vida. And then 1 year after it was extended. Now it wasn't only 8 states, it was 90 states. The budget increased. And then later, there was the focus on climate change mitigation. So this was during the COP in Glasgow that it was announced that this is the big program against climate change. So you've seen we go from rural poverty to restoration, now to climate change. And then it was even extended to other countries in Central America. I mean, this is basically where you see the stars. This is where Sembrando Vida is kind of having an impact. I mean, maybe this is okay, but I mean, most of them is kind of double. You know, it's always about the payment is helping. So our results, we found out that even if reforestation was the goal, so there was really very much deforestation at the beginning. I mean, maybe you can't blame the Sembrando Vida program. I'm very careful of doing it. But I mean, many farmers, they just slashed down the forest because they wanted to be in the program. So this was one of the first contradictions. There was a lot of problem with the technical support and implementation. Not enough technicians, not enough trees, not enough of everything. And then about the beneficiaries, I mean, it really has a very big budget, and it was kind of promoted as this will be solving the entire condition of smallholders in the country. But if you look at the numbers, it's not even 20% of the smallholders in Mexico who really received this program. So we also need to see it under this aspect. And then now we're going to political influence and policy drift. I mean, I already pointed this out. I mean, from an emphasis on poverty reduction, then promoted as the big program against climate change. And then also the role of the mañaneras. And this was really, I think it's a little bit annoying. So that about half of all people believe that this comes directly from the president, that it's such a personalized program. And many people also in the field told us, eso es por el presidente. And you can think about what you want to think. From a European point, I mean, I would never say this is a program I got from my Bundeskanzler. I mean, so and then the non-alignment with other policies and programs. There is this agroforestry program, okay, but on the other side, there was this massive investment in fuel production, in the Tren Maya, all this project, which really caused a lot of environmental impact. So, briefly, to answer our questions, Sembrando Vida always had multiple goals and aimed for policy coherence by addressing poverty reduction and also environmental issues. But this intention shifted over time towards more climate change emphasis. And also this came up with this opportunity to present it at the COP. And where the contributions of Sembrando Vida to the SDG and what evidence was there for policy coherence. Yes, it did align with the SDGs, but over time there was really this drift, and we also have the impression that it was also very much like, political opportunism. It was very good for the agenda. But I mean, it's not, I wouldn't say it's a bad program. The idea is good, and it really holds promise for addressing rural poverty and environmental goals in Mexico, but its implementation has faced significant challenges. Issues such as policy drift, lack of technical support, and unintended deforestation weakens its contribution to sustainable development. And then the political motifs, they have sometimes overshadowed really the program. So our recommendations, I mean, Sembrando Vida should adopt clearer and well-monitored strategies to align social and environmental goals. And I mean, there is a chance, because it's said that there will be a second phase of Sembrando Vida, so it's never too late. And there should also be more involvement of local people, which is really very, very important for its implementation. And addressing implementation gaps is essential for Sembrando Vida to fulfill its potential as a sustainable program. I haven't said this at the beginning, but we won't have questions after each session, but we will have it all at the end. So now I give over to Pablo.
There's a laser. Hi. Pablo? Good morning, everyone. It is hard for me to stand in here because it feels very special to be in Oaxaca, where I was born and raised, and come back to talk to you all about my work after 5 years of being an expat in Canada. I've missed Oaxaca a lot, and my parents are here. And it is somehow a big pressure to present for me. So bear with me if I just break into tears. But I'm going to present a paper that is already published. So if you miss the presentation, you're not missing anything. Everything is in the paper. But I want to try to explain the paper in 10 minutes. So I'm going to make an effort to tell you how we have assess the early outcomes and the targeting of this Sembrando Vida program from the perspective of forest cover, poverty, and biodiversity. My co-authors, Philippe, Janine, Patrick, they're all in the conference. And Frederick is not, he's the economist. And so I'm currently studying in UBC, Canada, but I was born this year, and I am very, very grateful for this opportunity of having the GLP, not because the conference bought me a ticket back home, but because it is a very special moment in many, many ways. And I want to frame my presentation in the momentum of restoration globally. Birgit has given us a very interesting perspective from the internal Mexican kind of reading of Sembrando Vida. I read Sembrando Vida from the global perspective. We are in the ecosystem restoration decade, and we also have the Bond Challenge and many other initiatives that are attempting to restore a lot of land across the globe. 350 million hectares, it's just the Bond Challenge, and there is a land gap report that says that we officially have around 1.1 billion hectares already pledged to be restored. And there isn't enough land for that, as Pedro Brancalion has already spoken about. Look at all the countries that you see here have pledges. They have said, we are going to plant trees in our land somehow. It's not very clear how. It's not very clear if they mean planting trees or planting trees and taking care of the trees. And there's many questions about assessing this kind of initiatives. And there's a stream of thought called the forest landscape restoration, which talks about fulfilling many objectives by planting trees. We plant trees because we want to sequester carbon, but we also want to increase forest cover, protect biodiversity, and bring benefits to communities. Esteve has already made an amazing point about it, so you can watch the recording. but we had the payment for ecosystem services for a long time, and now we have a similar policy, maybe just frying the other side of the tortilla, but it would be very, very interesting to have a good assessment and have an analysis of some and policies like such. So when you have forest restoration as a framework, you also have the local context. That's why I only do research in Mexico. I barely know Mexico, but at least I know something in Mexico to have a political and contextual reading in which my data are embedded. And I worked at the national scale, which is a lot of data, as you will see. But the big question is, how does restoration works in Mexico once you lay the international, global initiatives with the local context? And we're going to use the Sembrando Vida to make a quick analysis. In this case, this is a quick analysis. There is lots more to be done, but this is the first national analysis of what happened with Sembrando Vida. Things I need you to know about Sembrando Vida is that it was launched in 2019 and it rolled out year by year to different states. It paid minimum wage, salario mínimo, to all the sembradores. The sembradores were recruited at some point, and then they kept getting monthly payments from the government. And in exchange, people get 6,000 pesos to plant 2.5 hectares of agroforestry plants. It is the first time that a program decentralizes agroforestry in such a way. So Sembrando Vida is a very innovative program. And nobody knows what happened to Sembrando. No. So we built a data set. We needed data, and the government was very reluctant to share their data. So we said, anyways, we're going to get whatever data there is. In Mexico, the government is forced, obliged by transparency to post every single payment they made to the farmers. So we took 18 million payments from the internet, organized them, and then got a beneficiary database and a municipality database that allows you to produce this map, which is the first map that tells you which regions in Mexico have had the most pressure in terms of getting most of their families into Sembrando Vida. We can also we can also look at the absolute number of people, but I do think that this green map is a little bit more informative because it tells you what proportion of the families have Sembrando Vida in every municipality instead of the absolute number, because we do not grasp what's the size of the municipality. Right? I'm gonna give you, and this is something. This is the only data that we have nationally about Sembrando Vida. Some very quick numeralia about the program. Right now, by April 2024, Sembrando Vida has 434,000 beneficiaries. Oops. Well, ¿me pasan el slide, chicos? Ya no funciona. Well, it has several other. Oh, okay. Otra. Bueno, there's 1,000 municipalities out of the 2,400 municipalities participating. The mean participants is 420. I want you to look at this municipality here, Ocosingo. That is the champion of Sembrando Vida. Absolute numbers are the highest here. 16,000 sembradores accumulated in one municipality. That, if you make the numbers, it is a lot of money. And so I'm going to look at three objectives of Sembrando Vida, which are the most important from the perspective of forest landscape restoration, which is the most important philosophy and approach to restore land. One of the objectives is getting the money to the poorest people. The other objective is to reduce deforestation. People are planting trees instead of knocking down trees. And the third one is we have to restore biodiversity. So we want to go to the areas that have the most biodiversity. And so we ask, can you actually get to the areas that have the three objectives simultaneously? Can you? Then to what extent, knowing where the areas that prioritize the three objectives are, did Sembrando Vida actually get their money there or somewhere else? And then, this is work in progress, but what happened to the forest cover once Sembrando Vida arrived? So was it possible, in principle, to target all the objectives simultaneously? Forest cover, reduce deforestation, tackle poverty, and protect biodiversity. So this is not what we did, but I'm going to just give you an idea. Here we have a map of poverty in Mexico. If the area doesn't have dots, that means that municipality is very poor. Here we have a map of priority for biodiversity restoration. If the map has a darker blue, that means that there is a high priority for prioritizing biodiversity. And if this map is very red, that means that those municipalities are losing forests very quickly. So what you want to do is make a sandwich, three of them, and then look at the areas that have the most of everything. Make that map. You lay them one after the other, after the other, after the other, you get this sandwich. And this sandwich tells you exactly so the second question is, we haven't looked at Sembrando Vida at all, right? But we know where Sembrando Vida should be put. Did they? No. Let's see. Let's see by objective. Did they get to the poorest area? Did they get to the most deforested areas? Did they get to the most important biodiversity area, right? And so we are gonna make a sandwich with this map and our previous sandwich. This is a double stack King Burger Whoop Kinger, right? Like, it's getting big. And once you make that sandwich, it's not visualizable because it's already 4 dimensions. We have that poverty was actually prioritized by Sembrando Vida. The only objective that was included in the rules of operation of Sembrando Vida was poverty. And so that helped Sembrando Vida also to prioritize poverty. The absolute forest cover loss, so this is deforestation. Deforestation was also kind of prioritized, although you need a little bit of nuance to understand how that happened. It's not as clear as poverty, but biodiversity was tremendously, significantly relegated in the prioritization. We can see that 42% of the people are in high poverty areas. 75% of the recruits are in areas that lose forest cover very quickly, deforestation. So in absolute numbers, forest cover was actually the one that most. And then biodiversity restoration was just really. That's what I want you to take away from this the second question. But then, well, you design Sembrando Vida and you think, we have bare land, you're going to come and put some trees in the land, so we will have more trees in the land after Sembrando Vida than before Sembrando Vida. That is a very simplistic approach. So, Sembrando Vida has been criticized by deforesting the Selva Maya, and I want to show you this graph very quickly, and this is pretty much my conclusion. Every dot is a municipality in Mexico, and if you see it green, after Sembrando Vida, the deforestation rate has likely more trees after Sembrando Vida than before Sembrando. But the red ones actually increase deforestation after Sembrando Vida. So we need a very careful analysis of what is going on in the country and what happened in both these very stark differences between municipalities. If we add the size of the municipality as the volume of the dot, I'm going to give you a little insight here. These are the municipalities that have Sembrando Vida pretty much in every household. Like, a lot of money for Sembrando Vida. And even then, there is a few municipalities that incurred in increasing deforestation, which is a pretty interesting thing. And stay tuned because there's a paper coming about this eventually. I'm done. We'll talk about the objectives. Thank you very much. Thank you. No questions, so I'm going to give it to Sofia.
Oh, now. Okay, perfect. Hello, everybody. My name is Sofia Winkler-Shore. I am also talking about Sembrando Vida, but today we're going to talk about psychology in my talk, which might be a topic that not a lot of you think about in the context of conservation. Something that you're all familiar with probably is that mitigating climate change and biodiversity loss really requires changes in human behavior. And there's a lot of ways to do this. I come from a psychological perspective. But specifically, I'm looking at financial incentive programs. And Esteve gave a great foundation for some of the pros and cons of financial incentive programs, and I'm going to build on that. So financial incentive programs were designed in the 90s by economists with the goal to change people's behavior. They came up with several types of programs like PES or conditional cash transfers. But the goal is if you pay people, you help meet that triple bottom line. You meet the needs of the communities, you help the environment, and you also offset the costs. And these programs have become really popular worldwide. There are now $36 to $42 billion invested only in PES alone annually, and there are 550 programs worldwide. And there's good reason for that. Financial incentive programs have a lot of benefits. They help people promote quick and widespread adoption of new behaviors. They reduce resistance to changing people's behavior, and also they help bridge that economic gap. They provide people money to engage in those practices. But some of the drawbacks of financial incentives is that they can undermine intrinsic motivation to engage in conservation practices. So someone who wanted to engage in conservation without financial incentives might not do so afterwards. Additionally, behavior change often ends when payments end. And this is a really big topic that's very seldomly talked about in conservation. There's very little research on the long-term implications of financial incentives once it has been removed. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. My underlying question is how can we harness all these benefits of financial incentives while mitigating these known drawbacks. And to understand that, we have to understand the complexity of human behavior, because human behavior is not just about receiving money in the moment, it's about the long-term implications of money and other motivations that contribute to that behavior. So to understand behavior, I'm going to talk to you quickly about motivation. According to self-determination theory, motivation is on this spectrum from extrinsic, which includes financial incentives. You're doing something as a means to an end. You want to gain something from that behavior, whether that's social approval or making your ego feel better. But at the other end of the spectrum, there's this intrinsic motivation. So you're doing a behavior because you're genuinely interested, or the behavior's in line with your values and goals. Now, financial incentive programs focus on this extrinsic motivation. And while it has a lot of benefits, as I said, it's quick to develop, but it's fragile over the long run. So we have this fundamental issue that to change human behavior, we're using these levers that ultimately don't have long-term effects. So I researched some psychological drivers of long-term behavior and found two specific psychological drivers that within the context of financial incentives and outside of financial incentives have long-term implications for behavior. The first is habits. So habits are semi-automatic or subconscious behaviors, and they're 40% of our daily behaviors or more. What's important about habits is that we don't have to think about doing the behavior. They're not cognitively taxing, and so we will do it after we've developed a habit. But financial incentives can help us form these habits by providing us repeated motivation to engage in the behavior until the behavior becomes easier. The second one is social norms, which you are probably more familiar with. These are unwritten rules of society, and financial incentives can increase the number of people adopting these behaviors, which changes people's perception of how common that behavior is. And ultimately, behaviors will not continue if social norms do not support them. So what I'm looking at today is how we can strengthen this intersection between extrinsic motivation and intention to persist, long-term outcomes of behavior. And this is specifically because people who enter financial incentive programs have a wide variety of motivations, and we can't guarantee that they have the good kind of motivation that's intrinsic. Many of them will likely have extrinsic motivations as well. So I tested the moderating effects of both habits and social norms on this relationship between extrinsic motivation and intention to persist, and I predicted that individuals that had stronger habits related to agriculture and also stronger positive social norms related to agroforestry would report a stronger relationship between extrinsic motivation and long-term outcomes. As you may all know, I tested these hypotheses on the Sembrando Vida program, and since Pablo did a great introduction, I will only say two things. First, Sembrando Vida is currently active, so I could not measure actual persistence. I measured intentions to persist. And second, the program really focused on cohorts. They had social and agricultural technicians that facilitated communities in learning the practices and required them to come together once a week to engage in these practices via communal work. So my two underlying research questions are, one, what motivated participation and persistence in Sembrando Vida? And I address this via qualitative questions. And two, how can we strengthen this relationship between extrinsic motivation and intention to persist? I did my research specifically in the state of Yucatan, on the peninsula down here, for those of you who aren't familiar, pretty far away from where we are. And I worked in indigenous agrarian communities with Maya populations. The villages I worked in were between 200 and 5,000 people. They are not in the high priority areas that Pablo outlined. And there are high rates of both poverty and illiteracy in these communities, which influenced also my survey methods. So I did in-person semi-structured surveys. I surveyed 61 participants between January and April of 2023. And we used random sampling to select the cohort and also the participants who participated in the study. We offered these surveys in Spanish and both Maya, and you can see some of our methods here for how we elicited responses. For qualitative methods, I did a open thematic analysis and then linear regression modeling. So we had 79% of participants were men, average age was 55, and 33% of participants reported speaking only Maya in their home, and 48% had less than a primary school education. Also important to note is that for 58% of people, Sembrando Vida payments made up their entire household income. So poverty was high in these regions. I also asked about parcel characteristics, though. Specifically, the distance from someone's home to their parcel was about 4 kilometers. I asked about the average number of tree species they had planted on their parcel, which was 22. I asked about the average number of saplings that each person lost during the program, and it was 644. And then finally, that's likely because only 17% of individuals had irrigation on their parcels. So now moving to the qualitative results. What motivated participation in this program? I identified 8 diverse themes that were mentioned more than 4% of the time, and the number one response was economic, which is not surprising for a payment program. But more interestingly, only 32% of participants mentioned solely economic reasons. In fact, the majority mentioned a combination of various factors that included both extrinsic and intrinsic forms of motivation. such as the type of work that they preferred agricultural labor, or even that they enjoyed farming, with 16%. Other factors, as I said, were that they were learning things, that they found it easier or preferred working in their communities, etc. But 35% of people did not mention money at all. So then I asked what motivated them to continue once that payment stopped. Why would they continue with their parcel or not? First, I asked, will you continue? 96% of people said yes, they will continue. And I asked them why. So the number one response here was 60% was, well, we haven't harvested anything from our trees yet. It's only been 3 to 4 years, so we want to reap benefits from our parcel. The second one is, well, we put all this work into the parcel over these 4 to 5 years, so we really want to get the benefit from the parcel. These are very logical responses. Other responses that were interesting was bequeathing land to their children, a productive parcel, or that they wanted to improve their subsistence, home consumption from their lands. But then I wanted to know what persistence looked like, because 96% of people continuing seems idealistic at best. And 60% of people said they would only work part-time, and this is a full-time work program. So they diverged a lot from the program goals. They said they would both reduce the number of hours they worked and the number of days they went to their parcel. So moving on to the quantitative results. I looked at habits and the moderating effect, and I did not find this was statistically significant, which I'll talk about in my discussion. And then finally, I looked at social norms. And here I did find a moderate effect on the relationship between extrinsic motivation and attention to persist, about 2%, which in behavioral science is considered moderate. And I measured these social norms by asking people, how many people in your cohort do you think are participating in Sembrando Vida because they care about the environment? Or how many people do you think are doing the best work that they can? So ultimately, what I find here is that programs should prioritize these motivational mixes. What we see from both the qualitative results and quantitative results that I don't have time to share is that people have a variety of motivations that influence their decision-making and processes. And financial incentive programs really oversimplify the decision-making process of human behavior. So if we're thinking about long-term implications as well, we should integrate social norms into these programs. All of our behaviors are guided by social norms, and while this is widely known in psychology, it's very rarely considered in conservation practices. And social norms can be cost-effective and easy to facilitate or diffuse across a program. For example, just by going back to my communities and saying 96% of you plan to continue, it could be as easy as that. And then finally, there are opportunities to strengthen, lots of opportunities to strengthen the integration of psychology into conservation, but specifically looking at my study that I found that habits weren't statistically significant. There's not a lot of this type of research happening in rural communities, and there's a lot of need to understand both the methods, how to capture habits, and also how to measure them on the ground via questions. And so there's a lot of room for improvement to investigate how we can integrate these concepts into program design. So in conclusion, financial incentives can help support long-term behavior change, but it's not just the financial incentive itself. And programs really need to consider the complexity of human behavior and also consider how we can make these programs sustainable over the long run. There are opportunities to improve program design with psychology, whether it's considering social norms or habits, or just understanding community values, needs, motivations, etc. And then finally, we really need longitudinal research. There is very little research on payment for ecosystem service programs or financial incentive programs across disciplines that suggest that financial incentives actually contribute to long-term behavior change. And in fact, they really don't. So we're investing billions of dollars into these programs without thinking about the long-term implications. As we all saw with the global pandemic, there's a lot of reasons why a program could be defunded or that someone chooses to leave a program, and then we've ultimately invested this money into these communities, and it doesn't necessarily benefit them or the greater long-term conservation goals we have. Thank you so much to my collaborators and everybody else on this slide. Gracias, and thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Well, good morning, everyone. I'm very grateful to be here, surrounded by so many friends and brilliant colleagues. I'm going to talk to you the next 5 minutes about the research I've been doing during the last year as a part of my PhD at the University of Manchester regarding the alienation of indigenous rights and forest restoration in Mexico. And luckily, I'm the last one because this is going to be a flash talk of 5 minutes, and already the floor has been set for what I'm about to say now. So what is the button? This one? So yeah, thank you. As I was saying, the last 6 months, times goes really fast. I've been giving spins in my head to these questions of how well do policies protect indigenous rights in forest restoration. In Mexico, it's the perfect place to come here and study and try to answer or understand this question. I think for many reasons. As we all know, this is a country with a huge biodiversity, biocultural diversity, 60% of the territory being community forestry. And I think the most important reason is because I did my master's degree and I was counting the days to be able to come back. So I'm here. Also, as Pablo was mentioning, this is a perfect time to study this topic because forest landscape restoration, it's everywhere, and countries are submitting these very ambitious agreements of restoring the land. So Mexico is not escaping of the reality with a very ambitious commitment with the bond challenge of 8.4 million hectares by 2030. However, the success of these very ambitious goals depends on how this aligns with the needs and the rights of the people on the ground. So far, I've been finding in my preliminary research some gaps between policy intentions and implementation with potential implications for ecological restoration and community well-being. And how I know this? Because I've been doing a policy analysis, reading these key 24 documents from 1988 to 2024. These documents are laws, strategies, diverse documents that are talking about IPLC. I will mention IPLC as indigenous peoples and local communities, but also forest landscape restoration or both. Also, these documents are between legally binding or not legally binding, and I've been measured these quantitative with an adaptation of a typology that was published this year by Dawson and also other colleagues that have been actually funded in the room. This year, this typology measured the IPLC involvement in policies from 0 to 5, being 0, no mention of IPLCs, and 5, full autonomy and self-determination in different degrees. So, with this index, I found that there is a very clear pyramid of inclusion level distribution of how the IPLC are framed in these policies. It's very interesting because we are in this successful story where it's supposed to be the best case scenario. However, I found there is a gap between the IPLC recognition and the decision-making autonomy according to this typology, where only 3 of these documents grant them substantial control of being autonomous, of having primary control over decision-making on the land. Also, I found there is a divide in the international and national discourse. In the international policies setting higher standards, level 3 or 5, versus national policies only operating at basic levels of stakeholder or consultants. On top of that, from those 3 that grant them substantial control, 2 of them are not legally binding. So that can bring some challenges. And as the challenges, I try to summarize as only a few of them to bring them. For example, there is a disparity between international standards and national implementation, with this international standard setting these higher aspirations. Also, a lack of explicit adaptive management principles and a lack of or insufficient guidance on adaptation interventions to these local conditions. Regarding key opportunities, there are many opportunities, but I think the basic one is there is a universal basic inclusion in these policies, with most of them, 96% almost, including APLC as stakeholders. Also, there is a strong international framework that can provide as a model for national policy engagement. And as other colleagues have mentioned, there is a recognition of ecological, social benefits, and also economic. So, a few recommendations is, if we think of this pyramid, try to elevate the inclusion for a stakeholder to partnership level or higher. It's a evident one. Also, bridging the policy gap between international standards and national national standards. Improve the implementation with monitoring and evaluation systems, adaptive management, local adaptation guidelines, and finally, keep integrating traditional knowledge, capacity building, and also technology. And since this is a work in progress, the next step will be working on the developing on a more robust, in-depth development where the forest landscape restoration principles will be included to assess along the IP inclusion typology how these policies align with what is happening on the ground. As mentioned, Birgit, policy coherence is key for implementation. Also, after this conference, I'm lucky enough to start my scoping visit for fieldwork, where I'm going to start mapping the key stakeholders, but also the successful case studies. And for that, I might talk with you, Pablo, because I'm very interested to know which areas I should be looking at, since this is a case study. As more I talk with people, sometimes success and model roles are not exactly successful. So I'm going to look deeper into what really success means in the context of forest landscape restoration. And that's it.
So thank you so much for all the very wonderful presenters. I think now the floor is open to maybe not so much questions. Yes, of course, questions, but also if you have now some good ideas. So debate.
Yeah, so just as a comment, we had a couple of talks earlier, sessions that were more methodological rather than concentrating on Sembrando Vida. But what we did was, instead of like predicting, hey, these are the things that predict where Sembrando Vida is, and it looks like it's doing a good job, we used 2020 deforestation and used Sembrando Vida as a predictor, along with 97 other variables, climatic, social, economic, etc. And we also did different levels of causal analysis using counterfactuals to go, and basically Sembrando Vida is a disaster from the deforestation point of view. I think that, well, I think in the sense of, what was good in some of these talks was getting, really local information, because I've seen, like, on Washington Post articles or in this, that people on the ground had found, hey, there's problems here. But going to this national analysis goes, well, here we have some good causal explanations for a causal inference that is at the statistical level. And the thing is that it's absolutely clear, it's like, it's 300,000 hectares were lost in 2020, and the vast majority of that was in places with the highest levels of Sembrando Vida. So we should have a paper sent off this weekend. It would be great to talk more.
Yeah. Thank you for this comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my question goes to the one who presented about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. I think it was you. Yes, and well, if you address this in the first part of your presentation because I missed that, then please you can just ignore. So my question is all about whether you take into account these interactions between the two, because normally we know this extrinsic and intrinsic motivation that do associate, right? And at the end, they are likely to come up with an intended outcome in the whole narrative of crowding out and crowding in effect. So I just wanted to understand if you take that into consideration and what's the outcome. Thank you.
Sure. I don't look at the interaction of extrinsic and intrinsic, but I do look at both intrinsic and extrinsic. They're different chapters. And I also break down motivation into 5 different types of motivation, looking at the entire gradient of extrinsic to intrinsic. So no interaction, but various analyses on different types of motivation and the outcome of intention to persist, as well as adoption intensity. Happy to chat more.
Yeah. He was very
well. Thanks. This is for Pablo. Great talk. Thanks, Pablo. Fantastic. Yeah, my question is that what's next? Are you going to go down in scale? Is it possible to discern municipalities to individual plots before we make assumption that has caused deforestation? Because, and have you think about this program should be in the hands of the Department of Agriculture or Forestry instead of being in Bienestar Secretary? I just want to know your thoughts about it.
Thank you.
I'll be very short. All these are disorganized efforts. Everybody did what they could. And this is an excellent first moment in which we're distilling what people have been looking at in Sembrando Vida. The next step is organizing. We need to organize and define an agenda so that we can collectively produce interesting outcomes that maybe will have a better impact than if we keep working isolated, right? That would be the next step. I can foresee a couple of very clear avenues.
Oh my God, that's so great that there is so much. Well, now I'm confused. I thought Esteban was first and then was the lady in red. And then, sorry.
That's good that there are so many questions.
Yeah, this is what
it's really exciting. Do you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, also a question for Pablo and Sophie. Pablo, but it also relates to the gentleman's comment. So my question was, I know it's unfair because this is your next step, I think, in your research, but the red dots have you noticed if they are located, these municipalities, in higher deforestation risk areas? That would be my first question. And the second would be, and also for your study, did you see PES having any moderating effect on those unsuccessful municipalities? That would be my question also for you in a way. And the other one is for Sophie. Sophie, of course you said it, you don't know if people are going to continue watering the trees once the payments finish, but so you were asking people, are you willing to continue? So first, do you think you had strategic responses there? First question, and related question, does it really matter if they continue? Because the trees should be tall enough maybe to survive enough, or I don't know. What do you think about these issues?
Sure. So for the first question about whether or not I think their answers were legitimate, of whether they would continue or not, I think you were getting at that. I asked a lot of follow-up questions that I didn't share. Will you change your parcel size? Will you reduce how many species you have, increase, etc.? My kind of reflection on it, and I have qualitative data on this as well, is that people aren't thinking about the potential barriers to continuing, because right now it's easy to continue with government support. But in focus groups, many people did then say, well, I'll keep doing my parcel. Maybe someone will help me, but if I'm a man, I might have to go to Cancun or Tulum, and then I'll ask someone to take care of it. And so there was the recognition that if it's not financially profitable, I cannot continue in this capacity, but maybe I'll continue on a smaller scale capacity. And I think that's feasible. I think people will maybe harvest things and use it as more of a subsistence than a large scale economic production, as the government is intending. Your second question, sorry, I already forgot. Oh, does it matter if they continue? I think if you're thinking about the program goals of environmental degradation, poverty alleviation, and mitigating migration, it does matter if they continue, because if it's not economically profitable, people will not continue in a sense that they're making money so they can stay in their community. And I don't think a lot of the trees after like 4, 5, 6 years will actually survive. In Yucatan, it's just so hot that they will need continued maintenance, and a lot of people, as I showed, experience significant tree loss. So I think if they stopped continuing maybe at like 6 or 7 years of tree life, then maybe the trees would continue. But this is space that they need to cultivate, and they might decide, no, it's not worth it. Actually, I'm going to put my milpa on it and take down some of the trees. Now, people didn't say they would get rid of the trees, but if you're not tending to them in this particular region because of the heat, it's very unlikely that they would survive unless they reached, medium maturity so that they could continue.
So I think the first part of your question was for Pablo.
So what was, you said the moderating variable, what was the moderating variable you were talking about? The program about the Pago para Servicios Ambientales. We put the both government programs in there, no comparison. The program de Pago para Servicios Ambientales, there's no deforestation at all, right, as far as we can see. So it's no, there isn't, right? There isn't, right? So in other words, in our methodology, what we do is you can go to any set of elements, go, it's like counterfactuals from A/B testing in some sense, right? We put Sembrando Vida in, and we put in PSA if it's in a municipality at the same level. Or we put one and not the other. We look at all the places where there's one and the other, one and not the other, not this, that, and not one and not the other. And that allows us to basically do the causal inference to go, no. Look, the probability of having high deforestation when Sembrando Vida is there, and you can put in all the other factors and go, hey, how much do I get a bump from Sembrando Vida in the presence or absence of all the other factors? And it's huge, right? It's just huge. So, as far as I'm concerned, as far as statistical inference is concerned, it's pretty much proved.
Thank you.
But I know the municipality of Chihuahua. In Chihuahua, Hansen algorithm doesn't work as well as it works in some other places. So this might be a mistake of the algorithm. But for example, Ocosingo, I pointed to Ocosingo. It's the most, it has 16,000 beneficiaries, right? And Ocosingo reduced its deforestation rate. It's hard to read the axis, but it reduced it, right? So I think you can have two neighboring municipalities in which you have different effects, because municipalities and localidades have very different conditions. Even a good or a bad major of a municipality can make an entire difference in the Sembrando Vida implementation. So I think Alana's work, Sofia's work, Mar's work are very important because they've seen the field and they've interviewed these kind of people. I want to build a hypothesis based on Esteve's comment, which is the amount of money that Sembrando Vida has poured in different municipalities according to their poverty level. If you were a person in a very high poverty municipality, I didn't show this in the presentation. If you're wondering where I didn't show it, but if you were in a very poor municipality, the amount of, this is in the axis, you see the amount of money circulating in the municipality that comes from Sembrando Vida. Alarming thing. All these ones have 200% of the money they have invested by Sembrando Vida. So Sembrando Vida duplicated the amount of money circulating in the municipalities from 1 month to another. That is an extreme. We need an economist to study this. It's crazy. And then the average amount of money circulating in Sembrando Vida in poor municipalities is around 50%. So you've doubled the income of the municipality out of the blue, and I do think that should be considered a tremendous shock. And you know what? That has to be analyzed with care, with qualitative data.
Yeah, we will do this all in the next years.
Gracias. Well, one of the things that we've been working in the southern part of the peninsula in Yucatan for 30 years, correct? And we've been looking at deforestation as our main pattern, to try to find explanations. And obviously, the region has experienced always different policies, different socio-ecological drivers that can, cause deforestation. And so what we found right now is that it's really patchy, and we want to unpack drivers. So if we go with it's Sembrando Vida, I think there's a little bit of a kind of maybe misinformation in that, because we have the largest deforestation really happening in Jopelche, no? And that's a municipio that is mostly driven by Menonitas. It's nothing to do with the Sembrando Vida. But if you do maybe a regional kind of assessment, then that could be sort of telling us really large rates of deforestation when maybe another driver is in place. So I think unpacking is really important, and this is what we want to do. So municipios are different. I think you mentioned this already, and there are mixed results, and it's also early. It's hard to detect these things. It takes time to detect policy, in the landscape. It took us a while to get Procampo, no? Just to see Procampo maybe being one of those programs driving deforestation. So I just wanted to sort of have that nuance, and then just see that there is evidence for other drivers happening in the region.
Yeah, and I mean, this is one of the goals, but we are still missing some input from Sembrando Vida, all the polygons where all the parcels really have been. And once we have this information, we can kind of then figure it out a little bit. I think now it's her turn because, yeah.
Thank you. So, yes, I have a couple of reflections. It will be great to hear back from the presenter. So, the first one is for you, before I forget the last presentation. I think it can be very useful, like the findings that you presented on IPLCs, Indigenous Peoples and Local Communities, for the new subsidiary body that was approved at COP16 just last week in Cali, because those are the types of things that will be important for establishing that subsidiary body is understanding better how the indigenous peoples and local communities are being considered, are voicing, their concerns, etc. So I think what you do has a lot of value for that. And then just in general, I love the connection between all the presentations, and I have worked on deforestation and policy for several years, and I always struggle in our region to find results on policy impact. It's a big void. It's very difficult to find that kind of information. So I think what you're doing has a lot of value, and some things that I want to say is I think we're missing, and based on what Pablo presented, like being such a big source of the income coming from these conditional cash transfer programs, I think we're missing the connection of or emphasizing the role that the biodiversity use can have also in poverty alleviation. Because you said it had the least emphasis, but I think they're presenting that as a free package program, but I don't see that the connections are being made very clearly. I also think it's important on the analysis on the political discourse. I found very interesting to see that the people on the ground are not seeing differences between the programs. We need to understand why. We're putting them out there like as innovation, but people on the ground are not seeing any difference with what has come before. And on the behavioral change, from my perspective, I think that's fascinating and something to consider in the policy design, in the policy implementation, really to carry this forward, and something that was mentioned, I think, across all the presentation, and it's like what is going to remain afterwards, right? So it's understanding what are those connectors, and I think that understanding those social norms and habits and how we preserve or reconstruct those social norms in contexts in our countries that are so beaten by violence, by displacement, by migration is a big question that we need to always keep in our north. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
The biodiversity dimension, this map I used from Comnavio is wild biodiversity. We have to make the nuance that probably the Sembrando Vida plots, as Sofia showed, have 22 crops or more. Just trees, not even crops. So just trees. So agrobiodiversity is another dimension that we have to study. Obviously, you can do everything, but just.
Yeah, I also want to just emphasize that, like, for example, the smaller scale studies, aside from Pablo's, we have very different experiences. I presented like a fraction of my data, and the people in my communities across 28 communities that I studied really did notice a difference in the policy. They made lots of comments like, this is nothing like it's ever been. I feel respected and like seen as an agriculturalist, that I'm actually being paid for things that I want to do. And so I think with Sembrando Vida, it's really important to consider the cultural context across the country, because it's so diverse. How the policy was implemented tried to be uniform, but the actual experience of being in the program differed significantly based on various factors, but people's background, agricultural experience, and also the technicians. It was a huge factor. I asked people about their experience with the technician, but negative experiences with technicians can lead to a demise of the program very quickly, despite someone's capacities in doing agriculture or other motivations or enthusiasm for engaging in the program. So I do really want people to consider the cultural context from the smaller studies, because it's not representative of the national experience.
Yeah, this is very true, and also depended when you ask. I mean, at the very beginning, when we asked in Calakmul, was really very bad experience, and after a while the technicians learned, and then they incorporated more indigenous knowledge.
Thank you. Just for giggles and fun, there is also like another part of this Sembrando Vida that they were trying to produce without agrochemicals, and that also created a different approach in process because there are a lot of communities that are having a lot of cancer and diabetes. So that also has to be some part of this because biodiversity and the health and everything. I don't know, just
Yeah, it was just a comment. It's a general comment. I'm a first time in a land science conference, and the thing is that one of the things that I find you're all doing incredibly complex problems, or trying to understand complex problems. I've basically seen no talk where the high degree of multifactoriality in these problems is taken seriously. I mean, obviously you have big problems of getting the data and integrating the data across different social, economic, climatic, remote sensing, etc., etc. And then second of all, you need to have methodologies. I mean, everybody seems obsessed with deep learning methodologies that can combine with data fusion, combine all the different data fields into the same resolution, and then say, well, what's happening? And so the thing is that, you know, my comment about the Mennonites, if you pass me the data for how many Mennonites there are in each municipality, or even at a smaller level, I will put them in our model, and I'll go, wow, Mennonites are a big problem, right? Our methodology is such that you throw in the data, and because the thing is, there's a lot of, let's call them Bayesian prior biases in the community. Oh, this is what's important, this is what's important, this is what's important. You know, throw in as much as you can, and let the methodology tell you important, important, not important, and then there's methodologies to go, what degree of causality do you think there is there, right? And the way to do that is just go, okay, we can look at combinations of variables and say, hey, if I have this particular combination, wow, if I take that variable out or I put it in, it's making a big difference. And that's a way to really infer causality. Well, You pass me the data. I'll put it in there. My grad student, who's a.
Okay, I think there is one question from Maya. So, and also, I mean, it's time for. Sorry,
it's the other one.
Sorry, that's her sister Mar. So sorry.
Yeah, no worries. No, just actually, I wanted to comment on that. I ended up in a different session. I also work with Sembrando Vida, and health and insurances is very important for farmers, and they would actually, if they were to enter a new revised agroforestry program, so I did a choice experiment with alternative policies that, like, where you can change the attributes, health indemnification, if they fall sick or if they get accidents, they would be willing to accept much less payment for that to be part of the program. And it's no wonder these are people that are in average 55, 60, and they are concerned that, and there's this constant concern of not being able to meet up with the quotas. So if something happens to them and they're not able to cope, then they have this existential fear that they're going to be kicked out.
Okay, what we will do now, we will just put up an email, so everyone who really wants to connect with us or have more good advice or data or models or all of this, you should connect to us. But now there is lunch, but also if there are more questions, please go ahead. Somebody else with a comment, question? Yeah, we could do this. Thank you so much for attending.